and welcome to the Sunday Guardian show by Joyeeta Basu. Today, I'm going to discuss the US elections with two esteemed guests. If I can introduce them to you, we have Captain James Fanell, who is a retired captain in the US Navy and a former director of intelligence and information operations for the US Pacific Fleet, the 7th Fleet, and Task Force 70. He is now a government fellow at the Geneva Center for Security Policy, a founding member of the Committee on Present Danger, China, and co-author with Dr. Bradley Thayer with Embracing Communist China, America's Greatest Strategic Failure. We also have Dr. Bradley A. Thayer, who is a founding member of the Committee on Present Danger, China, and co-author with Captain James Fanell of the book I mentioned, Embracing Communist China, America's Greatest Strategic Failure. Thank you for coming to this show. Welcome to this show. If I'm calling you Jim and Brad.
Absolutely, it's our pleasure to join you. And yes, Jim and Brad is fine.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting us.
Okay, my first question is that what is your view of the confusion surrounding the US presidency that we have witnessed in the last few weeks in particular, and the manner in which Kamala Harris's name was announced? It was rather unprecedented, isn't it?
Sure. I think what we're witnessing right now is the result of a party that is obviously in the throes of trying to retain power, and with a leader who's obviously got some very serious issues, medical issues, and it's really, as you said, unprecedented. So the announcement over the weekend or this week with President Biden saying that he will not pursue the campaign has never happened in American history. And normally, a vice president would be immediately, if there was any problem in a normal situation, the vice president would be automatically presumed to be the following person that would assume the campaign. But obviously there's problems there. There's issues with Kamala Harris in terms of her support. And now it seems to be turning, but in those first few days after the assassination attempt on President Trump, followed by this announcement, there was lots of questions about whether or not that she would be a suitable candidate, and there are still some. So I think what we're seeing is the throes of a campaign and a party that's one that is claimed to be transparent, but seems to be now working in secrecy as they try to essentially come up with a new candidate after they had a primary season where Joe Biden was the selected candidate. So it's unprecedented. It's very dangerous right now because America's national security and those with our relationships with our allies and friends are really put at stress by a number of nations, from China, Russia, North Korea, Iran.
Yeah, Brad, what's your view? Would you like to add anything on this?
Certainly. Jim framed it very well, including implications for key partners like India. My points are three. First, indeed, it's unprecedented that President Biden has very significant physical and cognitive frailties, which caused him obviously to choose not to run again. That was done with great reluctance on the behalf of the Biden administration and the Biden family in particular, and that's very important for the audience to understand. Secondly, Kamala Harris really has not been elected. She's, in essence, has been appointed to this position. The American system works with a series of primaries where the candidate is chosen ultimately at the convention, and the Democrats have essentially vacated that process, eliminated that process by choosing Kamala Harris. The third, which is unprecedented in modern American history. And the third point is, we're not yet sure that Kamala Harris is going to be the Democrat candidate. Before August 7th, the Democrats will be making their decision for their convention to be held in August 19th through the 22nd in Chicago, Illinois. it's very likely that Kamala Harris will be the nominee. But if she stumbles, then the true power in the Democrat Party, Barack Obama, largely may choose to replace her. So it's very important that the audience knows that things may change once again before August 7th, when the Democrats will essentially lock in their candidate. So it's a very fluid time, and it's a confusing time for many Americans, as I imagine many Indians looking at the situation, trying to make sense of what's happening in the United States.
What are the chances of Hillary Clinton trying to make a comeback? I mean, I'm asking this to Brad, considering you mentioned about this might be a change in candidate.
Well, Hillary Clinton would like to be president very much, but the animus that Barack Obama has for her checks any effort for her return. It would be very unlikely that Hillary Clinton is the candidate for the Democrats. Obama would have other individuals who are far more loyal to him and to his direction for the party, rather than Hillary Clinton. And for most of the Democrats within the United States, Hillary Clinton is a past force. She is an individual who is a historic figure in some respects, but she is of the past. She is not of the future for the contemporary Democrat Party.
Jim, what are the chances of who can be more loyal than Michelle Obama? What are the chances of Michelle Obama being nominated as Democratic candidate?
Well, I think, as Brad says, we cannot rule out these possibilities if Kamala does have some problems between now and in the Democratic convention. And obviously, Michelle's name has been mentioned many times in the American media. There's mixed reviews about what she would do or whether or not she's interested in running, given the comforts that she has essentially as the former First Lady and deals with Netflix and things of this nature in her own family. But if she were to come in, as Brad said, it is Barack Obama who is essentially the strongest person leading the Democrat Party in terms of giving the signals, just like we saw with this announcement of asking people to have Joe Biden step down. Those pressures were coming from Barack Obama. In fact, this letter that was written by George Clooney, the famous actor, apparently was given approval by Barack Obama, at least according to the press reporting. So if she were to come in, she would be a loyal player in terms of supporting the vision that Obama and the people that align with that view have. My sense of it is now, there's an old saying, you don't switch horses in midstream. You don't go across a stream with a horse and then say, oh, I don't like this horse, let me get on another horse. It's very difficult. And so right now, the Democrat Party is actually trying to do something that goes against history, which is after they've already picked a nominee to try to switch that out just weeks before a convention. So to try to switch again would cause great confusion and likely result in an assured defeat. So I think right now it's Kamala's to lose, and we'll see how that plays out. And the implications of her winning are very significant because she is one of the most liberal senators. In fact, there was a website called govtrack.com that you probably heard of it. And she's ranked as the most liberal senator, even more liberal than socialist Bernie Sanders. And the implications of that are profound.
I'm told that that website removed that mention. That is what I was reading on X, that they removed that mention that she was the most liberal. Because you see, I mean, what exactly, when you are talking about Brad, when you're talking about liberal, the most liberal, and what exactly does it imply in the US context, and how is that going to play out in the US election, given that on the other side we have Trump and Vance? So in that context, what exactly this liberal means? I mean, this is particularly for Indian audiences.
Yes, we appreciate that it can be confusing because the way Americans use that term, it means left wing. on the American political spectrum, not the way the British, or of course the way the term is understood in India among many in your audience, I believe. So Kamala Harris is representative of the far left wing of the American Democratic Party, which is intersecting now with Marxism and with Marxist approaches, which will be familiar, of course, to your audience. So when we're talking about a left wing or a liberal Kamala Harris, we're talking about what in the American context we would call progressive, which would be a euphemism for Marxist. Americans, particularly on the left, don't like to use that terminology, Marxism, for example. They prefer progressive. And the Democratic Party now is heavily influenced by the progressive wing or the Marxist wing among young people, certainly, and among the key actors in the Democratic Party, including Barack Obama and his acolytes.
Yeah. Okay, Jim, the question now is about Trump. Now, in terms of ratings, we saw Trump is way ahead of Biden. So what happens if there is, now that there is Kamala Harris on may some other Democratic candidate, what is the push that is coming for Trump? Because if we look back at the midterm elections, Trump's people did not perform well. So what is going on the Republican side?
Well, from everything that I can understand and the people that we speak with, there's a sense that polls can be, as you just kind of implied, incorrect. Like the midterm elections, there was this big expectation of a red wave, and the polls suggested that, at least the polls that were being promoted in the mainstream media. And I think that some people rest on that and say, oh, okay, we're winning, so I don't have to go vote. I think this time there's a big emphasis on saying, I don't care what the polls say, at least this is the Trump administration, we have to pretend like we're 10 points down. That's what they're saying. And I think that's the right approach. You don't presume that you've won just because you have some polls that say you're ahead. So I think the approach from the Trump administration is a realist approach, which is to say, I'm not going to take anything for granted. I'm going to go after every possible segment of the American populace. That's why you're seeing Trump really reach out to minority communities, the Black community, for instance, or spending time in Democratic states that were presumed to be strongholds of the Democrat Party. So I think Trump is, and his vice president candidate Vance, are going to pursue that kind of a strategy, which is to assume that they're not ahead and just act accordingly, which is to essentially campaign 24/7 for the next several weeks, trying to reach out to people and explain the differences between what their values are and their positions versus this liberal left-wing push that Brad described for Kamala Harris. And let me just say, when it comes to left-wing, why that matters for people like us that follow national security is she's a big proponent of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this program is now being challenged by the press. If you bring this up, you're accused of, having racist sentiment towards Kamala Harris. But the reality is that DEI policies have been pushed by the Biden-Harris regime into the Department of Defense and into our military. And it's weakening the resolve and capabilities of a military. And we're seeing that challenged in many different ways around the Indo-Pacific region. It's very dangerous that this kind of a mentality would take root and firmly be injected into the Department of Defense, because it will structurally weaken it and make us less reliable to our friends and allies and to our own national security.
Well, a question to both of you. Now, considering we are now going to talk a bit about USA and its foreign policy, specifically in the Pacific region and China, what sort of a difference would you see if it is a Kamala administration and if it is a Trump administration? Which way will things move in terms of US foreign policy?
Oh, there are tremendous differences, profound differences between a potential Harris administration and the return of President Trump. to the Oval Office. A Harris administration would be the continuation of what Jim Fanell and I call the neo-engagement policy towards the Chinese Communist Party. And that would be the continuation of trade relationships, investment within China that is sustaining the CCP at a time where, as you know, the PRC is undergoing tremendous economic difficulties. And so American trade and investment are a lifeline, and that would be sustained under a Harris administration. It would be as bad as the policies of the Biden administration have been with respect to the People's Republic of China. Trump administration will be the opposite of that. Trump recognizes the CCP's vulnerability, and working with allies and partners, as well as people of goodwill around the world, will be working to put great pressure on the CCP, ideally to evict it from power. So there's a night and day difference between the two administrations. In the Trump administration, the first Trump administration, of course, had many individuals focused on China, particularly on trade and on the security threat from the People's Republic of China. They were thwarted not only by individuals outside of the administration, but also in the administration. Were Trump to return in January to the Oval Office, to the White House in 2025, you would see a very focused concentration on recognizing the Chinese Communist Party as an existential threat to the United States, to our allies and key partners like India and Taiwan. So very different policies would flow, which underscores the importance of this election, not only, of course, for Americans, but throughout Indo-Pacific and indeed the world.
Yeah, Jim.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with Brad. This is it would be a stark difference. In addition to the difference in engagement that the Biden and then a Harris regime would have towards the PRC, I think, and Brad noted this, is the relationship with India would be much different, I believe. It's very clear that Barack Obama did not pursue a flourishing relationship with India as Trump did and his team. We saw things like the Quad be reinvigorated under Trump after a 10-year hiatus. We saw, mill-to-mill relationships deepen with exercises like Exercise Malabar that was conducted in your own Indian Ocean with navies from the Japanese, American, and Indian navies that had our aircraft carriers participating, and Australian Navy participating as well. We saw a deepening of relationship between the two leaders, between Prime Minister Modi and Trump. We haven't really seen a very deep relationship between the Biden administration and India. They send their representatives and they have some the trappings of that, but I don't think it has the same sense of commitment.
Okay. Now, when we are talking about Trump and Indo-Pacific policy, Trump and China in particular, now there is a belief in India in particular that Trump's foreign policy to a large extent is transactional. So when we are looking at transactional policy, with that, when he is talking about China, what is going to happen is that there will be some kind of, if China gives the US a good deal, that is, he is willing to look away from the transgressions of China. So particularly when we saw, even for example, what we saw Trump's comment on Taiwan. So that has created some worries over here. And I would say even around that part of the world. What is your view of that, Jim?
Well, my view is that President Trump is first and foremost going to be the president of the United States of America. So he has a firm belief that his job and role is to defend the country that he's going to be the president of. And I think that sometimes when somebody says something that clear and unambiguous, it's interpreted as America first equals America alone. And that there will be this pursuit of transactional relationships and only to seek its own power. And I think in a sense, Every country does that. I think it's not surprising that somebody that's the leader of their own nation would pursue the defense and the prosperity of their own people. But to say that it's some kind of America goes it alone policy, I don't think measures up in the history of the 4 years that Trump was in presidency. And I'll give you a little tidbit about how he really feels about China and the Chinese Communist Party. He was caught on a mic here in the last couple of weeks as he was playing golf with his son. And he said these words. It was particularly about the faltering performance of Joe Biden and a possible future with Kamala, and everybody focused on that. But towards the end of that video clip, he said one thing that was really important. He said that Xi Jinping was a fierce man. And he didn't say it out of admiration. He said it out of a true respect and understanding of the threat that the Chinese Communist Party offers not just America, but the world. And you don't call somebody a fierce man, and he said it twice, without having the understanding the way he approached China in the first administration. So I think Trump has a very interesting persona, the art of the deal, the way he goes about interrelating with and dealing with these leaders of these countries that are opposed to the liberal values that we all aspire to. But he is not somebody that is naive about this. And so when he presses his friends and allies, for instance, in NATO or Japan or Korea or now Taiwan, to do more to defend themselves, that gets misinterpreted as somehow being transactional and that he'll leave them. Well, he didn't do that in the 4 years that he was president. In fact, what he's exemplifying is to say, hey, this is a real threat. And if you say it is a real threat, then you need to do your share or more to defend your own nation. And so I think that's the kind of pressure that he'll apply. It's uncomfortable to many world leaders because many sit back and don't do anything, as we saw, for instance, in NATO before the invasion here. Yeah. The NATO nations were not paying their fair share, their committed fair share, and then they would go on television or write editorials or have these big conferences in Munich and say that the number one threat is Russia, and Russia's going to sweep all the way across to Western Europe. Well, if that's really true, then you think that people that are living under that threat would actually do something more to defend themselves. And I think that's the obvious question and the obvious dichotomy that Trump brings up. And again, people don't like to be confronted with that. But at the end of the day, I'd rather have somebody like Trump standing there and demanding that people defend themselves against these threats. And the threat from the PRC and the Chinese Communist Party is existential to freedom and liberty and democracy.
Brad, do you agree? And with that, I would also add the question that do you think a very strong attempt is being made to paint Russia as the main enemy and not China? As we were talking about Cold War I and Cold War II. So would you tend to agree with this?
I do agree with what Jim has said. I would add this. Trump has his own idiom, if you will. He has his own dialect. And so that is becoming, I think, better understood. But fundamentally, Trump is a realist. And he recognizes the threat from the Chinese Communist Party. And he will, if he returns to office in January of 25, will marshal the U.S. government and energize the U.S. government in conjunction with allies and partners to target the Chinese Communist Party in a way that no president has done. And so we should expect that. And India, of course, Modi's government will obviously be a key role and a key component working with the United States in I think many important respects. The focus on Russia has been driven by the Biden administration. It is not one that was shared by the Trump administration, of course. And Trump had, of course, a realistic understanding of Vladimir Putin when he was in office. The Biden administration's approach to Putin was schizophrenic. If you remember, Biden thought he was not going to invade Ukraine, had warned Putin not to invade Ukraine, but then Putin did. And as you well know, of course, and the audience knows, that in the aftermath of that, the United States government has moved heaven and earth to strengthen Ukraine and to engage in the fight against Russia. For many individuals, strategists in the United States, this is a very curious decision that needs to be explained, because Russia is not a superpower. It is not a powerful state like China. It has a significant conventional military, and it has a significant number, and in this respect, they are a formidable force of nuclear weapons, tactical nuclear weapons, theater, and strategic forces. But only in that regard. Americans often call it a gas station with nuclear weapons, right? I mean, essentially, they have energy resources and they have nuclear weapons, but they are not the equal of that existential threat, which is China, the Chinese Communist Party. So I think if Trump were to return, again, the focus would be on the CCP's rule of China, and Trump would move expeditiously to bring about the termination of that the conflict between Moscow and Kiev.
One quick question before I move on to my last question. Why do you think the Biden administration was quote unquote soft on China? This is to both of you. Jim, if you can tell me.
Well, they're fundamentally soft on China, I think, in large part because well, two reasons. The first is a historic, as we describe in our book, about this called the engagement school that built up following the Nixon and Kissinger visits in the early 70s and the shifting of our recognition from Taipei to Beijing in 79. And from 79 onward, we grew a cadre of experts, quote unquote experts, in the U.S. national security community that became proponents of engagement. Mike Pompeo, the former Secretary of State, called it blind engagement. I've used the term, and we've used the term, unconstrained and unaccountable engagement. It's just engagement for engagement's sake. And that took root. And so part of the Biden administration is a return to what Obama and the Bushes and the Clintons did, which was to engage for engagement's sake. But there's another part of that, and we talk also in the book about this, is that there is people that benefit from that engagement financially. And so I think the Biden administration has a lot of questions that they're going to be answering, at least with this current House of Representatives and the Oversight Committee, and that's looking into what is the influence of the PRC into the United States political landscape, who's been paid off, who's been given contracts and things of this nature, and does that influence their decision making? So I think this natural 50-year history of engagement that took root, and then this idea that there's really corruption in some circles, I think that's the real reason why they were so inclined to be soft on China. Now, they will say, and they deny that they've been soft on China, but the fact of the matter is they have not pursued with the same vigor, the same trajectory that the Trump administration had been on. And it was the Trump administration that was the first American presidential administration that broke from the engagement school.
Yeah, Brad, your views quickly.
My views, I agree with what Jim said. I would add the following. We develop in the book the concept of threat deflation, which is with the U.S. national security community year after year underestimated the threat from the Chinese Communist Party as the PRC grew year after year. And this is a pernicious problem which has affected both parties in the United States, and it has heavily affected the Biden administration. And that is grounded in the CCP's political warfare strategies. In India, you'll be familiar with this as well, how the CCP works to penetrate Indian society, Indian politics, to shape opinions. And they do that through bribery. They do that through many tools of influence. And so the Biden administration has that major problem, as many in Washington do. Our think tanks are still captured by old thinking, and that old thinking is driven by the political warfare strategy of the CCP. So it contributes to threat deflation. And if you don't think the CCP is a threat, then you're willing to continue engagement. You think that by engaging with it, you're going to bring about a stable relationship. You'll be able to resolve the problems. And of course, that's a fool's errand, right? That is idealism. That's not realism. So our problems are profound. As Jim said, it's only Trump that has broken with that threat deflation concept to recognize the true nature of the CCP. And that's a very important difference, again, just to underscore what a Harris versus Trump administration policies would be towards the People's Republic of China.
We are looking forward to reading your book when it is available in India, possibly next year, I hope. And one last question. Trump is saying that he will end the Russia-Ukraine conflict as soon as he comes to office. I mean, do you think it's possible for him, say, for example, there's so many conflicts happening right now. We are witnessing it even in the Middle East and the Russia-Ukraine. Do you think Trump has it in him to end the conflict? I mean, if not as soon as possible, but inside the next few months of his coming to power?
Yeah, I believe that Trump, if there's any one person on the planet that could end this conflict, I believe it's President Trump. He's demonstrated this ability to cut through the chaff, cut through, baloney, as we say in the U.S., and get right to the heart of the matter, find the pressure points that both sides would be interested in, and trying to get and resolve an issue. The one area, though, that he may have some difficulty, and we saw this on display here in the last 48 hours. We saw Russian and Chinese bombers for the first time ever fly into the Alaskan Air Defense Identification Zone. And in the previous week, we had Chinese and Russian naval forces also up in the Alaskan waters. And it's not Alaska that's really the issue. The point is, Russia and China now are really working together closely. And we could go through a whole lecture on all the things that Putin and Xi have been doing and working together. And it's largely in part because of what Brad described as the Biden administration's obsession on Russia, and I would say the Clinton administration as well, and has driven Russia into China's arms. And so we have faced a situation now where both Xi and Putin are working together. They're strong allies, and their military alliance is very threatening. So would Xi want a resolution to the war in the Ukraine? Maybe not. And we just saw Chinese troops operating in Belarus here this last week. So there's Chinese military forces operating, on the periphery of a satellite state of Russia along the border with Poland. So this is a very serious issue. The alliance that has formed and cemented, in essence, over the last 4 years of the Biden administration. It's been very dangerous, not just for America, but for India as well. And so I think that could be the one area that would inhibit Trump's ability to use his magic, if you will, to be able to personally resolve the situation.
Yeah, Brad, what do you think about it?
I agree with Jim. This is a conflict that can be resolved through negotiation. And whether it turns into a frozen conflict or whether it turns into an armistice, simply a ceasefire, or whether there's a treaty, of course, remains to be seen. But there is nothing that's inherent in terms of the tensions between Moscow and Kiev that compel this conflict to continue. The point that Jim raised about the CCP's influence, right, is pernicious, and that is Xi Jinping is a Leninist at the end of the day. And of course, Lenin recognized, as he said of the Tsar's government, the worse the better, right? As long as this war continues, that's good for him. It keeps Russia in his camp and under his influence, and it occupies the United States and many other actors. And it divides, if you will, a natural coalition to come together to balance China, the People's Republic of China, that would involve Russia, Japan, India, and the United States. So when we think about the conflict, there's nothing inherent in the conflict that compels it to continue, but there was a bad external actor, Xi Jinping, who has a very strong interest in continuing it, which is why it's critical that Trump returns to office and uses his prodigious talents in conjunction with allies and partners around the world to bring this conflict to an end as rapidly as possible.
Well, I think it was a very enlightening discussion. I really enjoyed speaking with you, both of you, and I hope to welcome you back sometime in the future. There's so much to discuss, not just the US election, what you talked about, the Russia-Ukraine wars, China, and specifically the Indo-Pacific region. I'm certain that we can be discussing about all these things many, many more times. Thank you so much. Thank you, viewers, for watching. Until the next time.